So today I want to talk about four-stroke engines. This is a very complex topic, so I will just try to give you a rough idea. I mean, we will not like to go very deep into that, but just like to give you a rough overview that how basically the four-stroke engines work. So first, coming to the function of the four strokes, first of all is that why do we need a four-stroke engine? So initially earlier it used to be a two-stroke engine. So what was the disadvantage of two-stroke, that we actually took a jump to the four-stroke engines were that in the two-stroke engines with one combustion, the crankshaft rotates only one time. So the crankshaft is basically that piston, and it is connected to a crankshaft, and it will allows to rotate your tires basically. So it will rotate your tires only once. But in the four-stroke engine, what will happen that with only one combustion, your tires will rotate twice, your crankshaft will rotate twice, and which will ultimately rotate the tire. So that is the use of four-stroke engines, that in the four-stroke engines with only one combustion, the tire will rotate twice, the crankshaft will rotate twice. That's why we need a four-stroke engine nowadays. In basically in all the automobiles, or you can also see in the heavy machineries, we use four-stroke engines. Now if you talk about the components of the four-stroke engines, the components of the four-stroke engines were that this is basically a cylinder, here is the piston, and just right above left above corner of the cylinder you will have your intake valve. So just right at the top left corner of the cylinder you will have your intake valve. I will not like to tell you what is it used, because I will tell you in the later stage of the video. This is the piston, this is basically a cylinder, this is the piston. Right above it, what will have our spark plug. We will have our spark plug right above the cylinder. At the top left corner we will have our intake valve, and now at the top right corner we will have our exhaust valve. So I would like to tell you about the functionality later in the video. So this is like the basic components of the engine. Basically this is cylinder, piston, intake valve. At the top right corner we have a spark plug, at the top left corner we have an intake valve, at the top right corner we have our exhaust valve. So now coming to the four-stroke engines. So the four-stroke engines are basically the different phases of the same combustion. Combustion will take place only one time, but it is basically the different phases. Now there are four type of strokes into that, which is intake stroke, and then again compression, power, and exhaust. So coming to the first stroke, which is intake stroke. So in the intake stroke, what will happen that piston, just imagine the piston is at this position, there is a cylinder, the piston is this position, and in the intake stroke the piston will go down. And now when it will go down, at the same time what will happen that that intake valve that we are having on the top left corner of the cylinder, it will open. So when it will open, what will happen that it's basically giving an access to the fuel and to the mixture of fuel and air to be get drawn into that cylinder. So when the piston will go down, the top right corner, the intake valve will actually get open, and it will give an access. And when it will go down, it will create a vacuum. So when it will create a vacuum, that mixture will of fuel and air will basically get drawn into the cylinder, and now the piston will go at the bottom of the cylinder. So this is the first stroke, the intake stroke, which is basically having an access for the fuel to be get drawn into the cylinder. Now coming to the second stroke, which is a compression stroke. So in the compression stroke, what will happen that a piston will actually go above back to its initial position, and during that what will happen that the mixture of the air and fuel, which was previously in this much volume, now after compression stroke this will be only in this much volume. And now if it volume decreases, we know in thermodynamics we used to study that if the volume is decreased, there would be a slight increase in the temperature, and obviously the pressure would be high, because if we have decreased the volume from this much to this much, the pressure will be high. So in the compression stroke, the piston will grow up again to its initial position, and now it's here. This is the second stroke, which is the compression stroke. And also I wanted to tell you that in the compression stroke, now that intake valve will get closed, because if it will not get closed, what will happen that we are putting a pressure, and the fuel and the mixture will actually finds a way to just finds a way into that cylinder to actually gets away from the cylinder. So during that compression stroke, that valves actually get closed, but in the intake strokes we want a fuel to be into the cylinder. That's why that intake valve gets open. So in the compression stroke, the piston will go up, it will create more pressure, and it will actually increase the temperature as well, which will make it more volatile and combustible. So because if there is a high pressure and there is a slight increase in the temperature, it will be more combustible. The combustion will take place very easily. So now this is the second stroke compression. At the initial position there is a fuel. Now what will happen, that the spark plug that we are having now at right above the cylinder, it will give a spark. So when it will give a spark, that fuel which will burn with huge amount of explosion, it will burn and will generate a huge amount of force. That is the third stroke, which is power stroke. So in the power stroke, what happens, that spark plug will give spark and that fuel will burn with huge amount of force. You can't even imagine, like nowadays the normal bikes that we used to see 90cc, there's splendors and etc., they used to have a 90cc cylinder. So I want to explain this also, that what is 90cc. And 90cc is basically this volume of that cylinder, that how much fuel can it take at one take, how much volume can be drawn into the cylinder at one take. So in the 90cc cylinder, you can have a 90cc. cc basically means centimeter cubic centimeter basically. So 90, because that volume always measured in the unit cube, so that's why the 90cc is the cubic centimeter volume gets drawn at one take into that cylinder. And also the super bikes also used to have a greater cubic centimeters, cc engines like 500, 600, maybe super bikes also have more. Some bikes have more than 1000 cc's as well. So that is like the basic thing, that compression stroke will gets about to its initial position, and in the power stroke, that fuel will generate a huge amount of force. And also I want to tell you that power stroke is the most important stroke of all out of all these four strokes. Why? Because this is the stroke which actually provides the more kind of energy to the engines, because during that the piston is going down with more amount of energy. Why? Because the explosion is taking place, and then when the explosion will take place, it will generate a force, and that force will actually makes that piston go down again to the bottom. And now during that, this is the power stroke, which is the piston is going down to the bottom. And now after that we are coming to the fourth stroke, which is the exhaust stroke. So now after, what will happen, that after combustion there will be some leftover, there will be there, and you have to actually take it out from the cylinder, because if you want another combustion to take place into the cylinder, you would have to clean that. So for that, what will happen, that the piston after power stroke, which was at the bottom, now again this time what will happen, that piston will go again up to its initial position. And now during that, the exhaust stroke, it will actually takes all the residue from the cylinder. And because I've told you initially in the video that there was one exhaust valve at the top right corner of the cylinder. So now that is their use is basically to actually makes an access for the remaining residue or from the remaining leftover to get drawn from the cylinder. So it will give an access. So during the exhaust stroke, it will actually basically create some pressure, and at the same time during the exhaust stroke, that exhaust valve, it opens, and it will give an access to the residue to actually get away from the cylinder to the exhaust system. So this is like basically the thing. And also I wanted to tell you one thing, that during the fuel mixture which actually get drawn into the cylinder, that fuel basically consists of our fuel, which is basically diesel and petrol, and the second one is air. Why air? Because we know that for combustion we need airs, because without that combustion will not take place. So air basically comes out from the carburetor. So you heard about a word carburetor in the bikes and cars, that we used to have carburetor. So what is the actually major function of the carburetor is that carburetor basically takes the air. It takes the air from the environment. If you are riding a bike, you will take the air and it will go through the filter. So we also heard about that in cars and bikes we used to have filters. So filters, basically what is their major function is, filter is actually to filter that air which is coming from carburetor. So carburetor is actually taking a air and it will go through filter. The filter have the ability to filter out the air to the size of 5 micrometer. I'm not sure about it, but yeah, I think to the size 5 micrometer it can actually clean the air, because we know that for the efficient work of engine we need as clean as air as possible. Why? Because the combustion will take place more easily. Because if we don't have a good air with the fuel which is being mixed and getting drawn into the cylinder, the combustion will not take place very cleanly, because we need that combustion to be as clean and to be as more powerful, because to generate that power it will give a torque to the crankshaft. So for that we need a clean air. So basically the filter used to there, and filter is basically this filtering out the air which is being drawn by the carburetor from the environment, and then it's going through the filter, and then with the intake system it used to go into the cylinder. So that's why also we used to hear sometimes, in our bikes, if we are not having a good average, or if we are not having, petrol and diesel, we are not having a good mileage, the wherever the service we will go to service our bike ना, he will used to tell इसका filter change करना है, इसका filter change करना है sir, इसका filter आप change करा सकते हो. Basically what he is trying to say that वो जो filter है ना, that will actually takes, because after getting used for like 1 year or 1.5 year, what will happen, कि वो filter जो है ना वो खराब होने लग जाएगा. So to get a good mileage he will actually advise you to actually replace it with the new filters. तो इसीलिए हम बाइक्स वगैरह में भी ना नया filters लगाते हैं, ताकि वो हवा उसके अंदर से निकले, और वो clean हवा जो है that will actually mix with fuel and goes into the cylinder, and then the combustion will take place, and the 4-stroke engines will help you, to actually rotate that crankshaft twice. So I thought maybe I could give you a value through something. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, you can put your reviews into the comment box. Bye. See you soon.